believe that everything in life relates to gun training, and everything in gun training relates to life. Join us as we explore the Defender's lifestyle through the lens of self-improvement. Welcome to Defenders Live. Hey guys, welcome to Defenders Live. I'm your host, Laura Thorson, and I'm so glad that you're with me tonight. Thank you for attending, and if you're new or watching this as a replay, welcome. We're so glad you're here. Tonight, we'll be talking to Thomas Yoxall again. We had Thomas on about a month ago, and he had an incredible story that he shared with us, and we decided to ask him back on to go a little bit deeper into his story and particularly the aftermath involved with defensive gun use or any defensive encounter at all. So we asked him to come back on. We really want to dive into helping people understand and prepare for that aftermath. And Adam Winch, the founder of Defenders USA, is right now frantically working to get on the live. He is not at his normal location, so we should be seeing him soon. But just know that the plan is for him to also be involved in the conversation. And we want him involved as well because he has another good perspective to add, and also because unfortunately he has experience in this area as well, both in military and law enforcement and also as a civilian. So he has a diverse background to pull from. And for some people, this topic may be a little bit uncomfortable to think about. But what I'd say to that is that I think that it's probably better to have this conversation now, to consider these things now, rather than sticking your head in the sand and not wanting to think these things through, and then being involved in something and not being prepared or considered any of these things. So I think that there is a lot more emphasis in the gun training world on the act of self-defense, the skill building, more than on preparing your heart and your mind for what happens afterwards and how to deal with that. It's not talked a lot about in classes. In some it is, but in the ones I've attended, mostly it's just skill building. And I believe that it's something that everyone should consider. So, contrary to what some people believe as well, carrying a gun or any type of defensive tool or having any kind of specialized training is not about bringing the fight to somebody. It's not about going to them. Rather, you should be doing everything you can to avoid the fight in the first place. But if you must fight, then you must win because your life or the life of your loved ones depends on it. And we'll learn as we go here in the event of defending yourself or others, that is just the beginning of a series of life-changing events that may that people really need to consider deeply. So I'm going to ask for your participation tonight in the comments. If you have questions as they come up, please put those in. We may or may not field those and put those in along during the discussion, or we might wait till the end and do a Q&A. We're just kind of gonna free flow tonight. So I'll formally introduce Thomas here in just a minute, but shout out, let me know where you're watching from tonight. I love hearing from all of you guys. And let's see. Oh, it looks like Adam made it back. Hey, Adam. Do you have audio? Well, I can hear something, so that's good. He wasn't ready for
it. Looks like I do. It looks like I do. Okay. Glad to be here.
Okay, good. I'm glad you made it. Awesome. So we've got Haven Defense Co. here from Colorado, Eric from Oregon. Thank you for watching, Eric. Lynn from Michigan, and Kathy from Michigan as well. Neil is on tonight. Hey, Neil, glad you're watching as well. Troy from Mississippi. I love saying that. And Scott from Fort Worth. Thank you for watching, Scott. So keep shouting out in the comments as we go along here, and Adam will put those comments up as we go. Formally want to introduce you again to Thomas Yoxall. Now, if you haven't seen the previous episode of his story, please go back. I believe it was just a month ago that he was on, and it was very Um, Educational, but it was deeply moving to hear what he went through. And he was very courageous to come on and share his story with us. So, to get even more context behind what we're talking about tonight, please go back and watch that. Thomas Yoxall was born and raised in Arizona. He's a freelance photojournalist and an outdoor enthusiast, as well as the creator of Get Out Arizona on YouTube. Thomas bravely saved the life of a state trooper, and his powerful story of survival and personal struggle is a valuable lesson in the realities of defensive gun use and the aftermath involved. And his story provides valuable lessons about preparedness and what it really means to and what happens after a defensive encounter. So let's bring Thomas on. Hey, Thomas. Thank
Hello,
you
how
for
you doing, Laura?
good. I'm good. So our topic tonight is maybe a little bit heavy for some people. We were talking before the show, and thank God that you have a sense of humor and you can bring that out once in a while because we do need
Yeah,
that every once in a while. But it
yeah,
is a pretty heavy topic. Where we left off last time, we did touch on the aftermath. We did talk about that a bit. But
right.
a majority of the show was your story and what happened, the timeline and the emotions you went through, the struggle you went through afterwards. But you have given presentations on this topic before, and you talk about the three fights. So could you tell people, first of all, why is this important to know? And secondly, what are the three fights and how can we prepare for those?
Okay, so well, I'll start with the three fights. So when I did the presentation, I call it the pre-fight, the fight, and then the post-fight, that aftermath. Um, People only want to hear about the fight because that's the down dirty details. For
Hmm.
whatever reason, and again, it's curiosity. I believe they are the most fascinated with, the most curious about, because it's not something that they see or hear about every day. Typically, only in television or movies. And it couldn't be further from that experience as so not what it is in that medium. Um, and why it's important, because our entire lives, like I say, every action, no matter, how mundane or how impactful, makes a difference. So what we go through, um, i.e. our diversity of life, our training, our skill set, um, shapes us and prepares us. Lord forbid that day comes and arrives. How will we either react because we don't have training and we're not prepared at all, or how we
Hmm.
respond because we have a skill set that maybe hasn't been used yet, but because of that rigor, that dedication to training, we're able to respond in hopefully a manner that is calculated and reminiscent of that training that we've been through. And it's important for people to realize that. Um,
Hmm.
Only in Hollywood do I know of someone, man or woman, will pick up a pistol and shoot a grouping that big from 50 yards and, walk away unscathed. It doesn't happen that way.
Hmm.
My encounter happened January 12th, 2017. And to that point, I was 44 at the time, give or take. Yeah, 44. But up until that point, I had been training rigorously for 23 years with
Hmm.
people who were certified instructors, military, law enforcement, all that stuff. I trained indoors, outdoors, at night, pre-dawn, the high heat of the day, shotgun, rifle, pistol, moving, all these different things. Because in my mind, I needed to train for more than what could possibly happen if I was going to be able to respond in an appropriate manner when that time happened. Part of that training is control, when to fire, when not to fire, backdrop, all these different things that culminate into an adequate response, not a knee-jerk reaction.
Hmm. And that's the pre-fight you're talking about?
Yes, all that leads
Okay.
up to the fight. People, and I've seen it before. They'll purchase a gun, typically a handgun. They may shoot it once or twice at the range, and then it either resides in their holster, that's on
Mhm.
their hip. And no offense to Black Hawk or Uncle Mike's, but I see it all the time, and they got a crappy
Mhm.
belt. They're not carrying concealed. It's open. It's just ridiculous. And you're like, I wish you had more training. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not saying, like, when I said it earlier, oh, well, all we do is talk about how to have skills of defensive use, the
Right.
act of self-defense. Hey, that's really important. I'm not saying it's not,
Yeah, it
but
totally is.
that's generally all that's trained, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And so, having that skill set and preparing for the fight is just one facet of it. For
Mhm.
me, the only time it had ever been mentioned to me was, um, I believe I was in my late 20s, early 30s, the first time someone brought it up. And it was during a class, and someone said, "Hey, what do I do, if I need to shoot somebody," is basically the verbiage that they used. And the instructor said, "You know what? Shooting the person is the easy part. It's living with it afterwards that's difficult. And you should
Mhm.
really take time to think if you can or not."
Mhm.
And that was it. That's the only
Mhm.
discussion that's ever been had in all the training I've ever had with anybody. It's like
Mhm.
almost taboo to speak about
Yeah.
that. And it's
Well, it's
giving a,
uncomfortable for people to think about. I really
yeah,
think it is. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's doing a disservice to the student at the time, because it really, you can't talk about one without talking about the other. That's like people saying, I don't believe in God, but I believe in the devil. Well, you can't believe in one and not the other. They
Mhm.
go hand in hand. So when we talk
Mhm.
about firearms and firearms training, the fact that you may be forced to use that training, and that use of lethal force, it needs to be spoken about.
Yeah.
And you can only hope. So, like for me, and in part of the pre-fight, I'm driving in my vehicle and I'm thinking, okay, if X happens, I'm going to do Y. And then because of that action, I need to do this. When I go into a restaurant and I'm eating for the first time, I'm looking where exits are, where covers at, like all this stuff I'm going in my mind.
Mhm.
And I'm mentally preparing myself if anything should arise. So at least this way I have
Right.
a rough framework of what I will have to do in order to save lives.
Mhm.
Um, and again, though, you never know. And that was one of the things we talked about on last show. You hope that if the moment lands at your feet, that you're able to respond. That morning, one of the emotions I felt was vindication, because I always said I would get involved. I would be the person to make a difference.
Mhm.
And I did. And there's some people, and there's no disrespect, that moment lands at their feet and they're not able to. And that's just the way it works out. And people don't
But
add into their equation either as far as the pre-fight. You have to be prepared. You might
right.
freeze. You might not
Right.
be able to do what you need to do. And that's
Right.
just human.
Isn't it better to know those things in advance, though, rather than to just think you're gonna be one way and then you aren't prepared at all for that, you know?
I, absolutely, Laura. I
Yeah.
completely agree. And so after the shooting, and I do photography and stuff for C2 Tactical. I love those guys, Gina Wagner and her husband Brian. Love you guys. I'd be there on a Saturday or Sunday or during the week, and they're teaching a CCW class, and they'd be like, "Hey, Thomas, we were just talking about you. You want to come in and talk to the class?" "Okay, are you sure?" And so I'd go in there and talk to the class, and guaranteed at least one person would ask for their money back, because carrying a gun wasn't for them. When they heard what
Yeah.
happened and what I went through and how effed up it was, they don't want any part of it anymore. And that's
Sure.
good.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is absolutely good. Not everybody was meant to be on the front line. Not everybody was meant to be that defender. I fall
Mhm.
back to a little bit of philosophy with Carl Jung and those architects or archetypes as far as who people are. You know, I've always been a defender. Younger sisters, just the way it was. Everything I went through as a child. That's who I am. So there really
Mhm.
wasn't doubt in my mind that I'd be able
Mhm.
to. But again, you never know until it's placed at your feet.
Yeah. So then let's get into then some of the what are some major considerations, and maybe we'll dive into each of what people need to be thinking about in preparation for after, and or maybe some of the things that hit you sideways like a Mack truck that you didn't even expect,
Right.
even given your training and everything.
Yeah. Um, so I think it's ironic, in every CCW class that I've listened to, or maybe I was there doing video or photo for the instructor or whatever, everybody talks about the legal aspect of it. And you have to have,
Mhm.
CCW owner, gun owner's insurance and all this stuff, and don't say a word, and da 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 da. They're always talking about financial liability and felony
Legal.
liability as far as the shooting
Mm-hmm.
goes. But what about the emotional liability? There's no
Mm-hmm.
mention of that in what you're going to go through. And for me, that bill, that tab started running the moment we drove up on the scene and I saw Ed, and that suspect was on top of him trying to beat him to death after he'd already been shot and split his skull. And these were things that I didn't find out, obviously, until after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
So now, as the scenario unfolds, that tab becomes larger and larger because as I exit my truck with my gun in my hand, I am stepping over a dead female. I am forced to put, 3 bullets in a suspect, fired 4 times, and watch his brains explode all over I-10 westbound. And then I have to change hats and become a first responder and try to stabilize Ed for help to get there, which
Mm-hmm.
was half an hour away at best,
Mm-hmm.
And so now all these different things that I'm going through are just, they're building up that tab. It's more and more that I'm going to have to, pay for down the road.
Mm-hmm.
People don't realize that it's that caused me the greatest amount of mental and emotional disturbance, not worrying about, am I going to go to jail for this? And there's going to be civil liability. That was the furthest thing from my mind. But that meter started running the moment we rolled up onto the scene, and people
Mm-hmm.
don't get that.
Mm-hmm.
I know people handle trauma in different ways, and I feel sorry for the person who doesn't feel, because I think that's indicative of a larger problem. But at some point, that trauma will explode, and
Mm-hmm.
either get in front of it and try to minimize the damage from the explosion, or you can just watch it unfold and completely downward spiral. And I was on the edge of completely downward spiraling. It was just the way it was. I kept on denying to myself that there was an issue because
Mm-hmm.
I'm tired.
Trying to be strong.
Wrong and
Yeah.
everything, and it just,
Mm-hmm.
God, and again, I go back to this. Thank God for James Bird, Sergeant with Phoenix PD. He was my lifeline. And I'm grateful every day that he took the time, that he recognized, but he took the time to say, "Hey, you and I need to talk."
Mm-hmm.
And I wish everybody had that experience with somebody, or had people close enough to them to know to recognize those symptoms and be brave enough to approach, because that's hard. Because at that point, I was pushing people away without realizing I was pushing people away because I was hurting so badly inside. And so to take that step, knowing that, someone, there's nothing wrong with me, and they're going to be angry with you,
Mm-hmm.
friends, that's a hard one to deal with. So give credit where credit is due. And I was grateful to have him.
And so there was the emotional piece, and if you could dig into that a little bit more as far as helping others who may go through something that traumatic, what considerations would you recommend for them? Things maybe that you would have done differently, things like that.
Well, I mean, when we look back at hindsight, being 2020, I don't know if there's anything that I could have done differently, because who I am is who I am. To say I would
Mm-hmm.
say things differently is to say I'm a different person, which I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
It's polarizing, and it's paralyzing all at the same time, because you have one part of yourself that's saying, "Hey, there's nothing wrong," and the other part of your mind, your mental faculties, your emotional faculties, is saying, "We need help." And so there's that tension between the two, and because of that, you're very much in autopilot. And that's why I say it's paralyzing, because you don't realize really cognizantly, consciously what's going on. And again, that started right then and there. So after the final shot and everything's done as far as the actual shooting goes, I'm watching a suspect bleed out, which I had never seen before. I am also making sure that the scene is secure and there's no other danger. And now I have to be first responder, and all that medical training that I've taken up to that point, I have to stabilize Ed. But in my mind, I am already thinking, if he dies, you are a loser. This is your fault. Your training wasn't good enough. You were not good enough. You did not meet whatever qualification to be this person to help out. And I'm mentally beating myself up every minute the clock ticks, and I'm waiting for, which I assumed a DPS showing up first, and the air vac. I'm crushing myself mentally, because if he dies, it's all my fault. I wasn't concerned about anything else except for his safety. And even after they arrived and I give over the scene to DPS, so there's a relief. I'm asking, hey, how's Ed? How's he doing? I need a report. I need to know. More than anything, I didn't care. I was more than willing to answer their questions, but even after the fact, and they take us back to the truck and the scene and everything, I'm just, how's Ed? And it wasn't until I was told that he was going to be okay that I was able to, breathe a sigh of relief. Okay. I didn't fail. It wasn't a personal failure, which that would have been so hard for me to overcome had he died, had he not make it. Because again, internalizing, even though I had nothing to do with it whatsoever, I was already internalizing that. And the guilt that you feel, that I feel, because I was with another person. I mentioned that in the last show that we did, Heidi Jones. She didn't ask to be there. It's not like I looked at her and said, hey, do you mind if I help? I looked at her and said, call 911. She had no choice. And so I felt guilty because now I put her in a position, in a place, and through my actions changed her life forever. So now it's not just the guilt and what I'm feeling emotionally. Now I'm taking on like that guilt from her, like she's upset, and that's horrible. And at one point I broke down and I looked at her while we were in California, in Anaheim, and said, I'm so sorry, for putting you through that. You didn't ask to be there. And I felt horrible. And I mean, what are you going to do? These are the decisions we make that we have to live with. Part of me felt horrible for stepping over that poor woman, that young woman. She was dead. I knew she was dead. The trauma and the non-movement, there was no way, but I didn't even hesitate. I literally stepped over her. And not a whole lot of people that I've ever encountered say, yeah, I just stepped over bodies, no big deal. Nope, that's not how it works. And so,
well, if you're not used to that, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the tough things for me, because she was essentially face down and all that trauma, when I looked at the scene photos, there was also autopsy photos. And so that was the first time that I saw her face. And that was rough. She was a very young woman. And, I just felt horrible. And then that guilt, God, maybe if I would have got there a little sooner, I could have saved Ed and her. So these are the things that roll through your head.
The what ifs,
and this,
And
this is all just at the scene. This has nothing to do with even after the fact. The fact that I can't get that last shot I fired out of my head, where quite literally the suspect's head is back and it comes up underneath here. And, again, not to be graphic on your show, but, I'm watching this happen. I'm watching blood pump out of that entry wound. And I'm like, okay, that's odd, because through my head, and this is maybe, dark humor or whatever like that, but for that fraction of a second at time dilation, oh, look, blood is pumping out of his neck. It's steaming, but that makes sense because our body temperature is 98.7 degrees and it's currently 40 degrees outside. And if I think back to freshman science.
You're literally thinking that?
And I'm talking, it happened like that. And then I realized, oh, okay, I got to get back to what's going on. But it was that kind of distracted me, And so, so it's stuff like that. It's all those little things that I vividly remember from that. And, even now, the smell of blood will cause me to recoil. I've never
I was going to ask you about different triggers maybe that you have that you didn't have before. Yeah.
The smell of blood, even like I'll get a nosebleed, and anybody who's had a nosebleed, you kind of get that metally taste, but you also get that smell of blood. It freaks me out. And before, when I've had a nosebleed, I was like, nah, let it bleed. And now I'm just like, Jesus, I got to stop this before I have a mental breakdown. But smell is also one of the strongest conduits back to our memory. So that doesn't surprise me as far as that go.
Mm-hmm.
So seeing those images in my head, that's part of it. Part of it is the nightmares that you have. I was consistently staying awake because I didn't want to sleep. And when I would fall asleep, I would see Ed's face. I'd see the suspect's face. I can't get there. My gun's malfunctioning. Like, think of all the worst possible case scenarios that you could have during these dreams. And it wasn't just about Ed. It was about saving other people. It's trying to run forward, but my feet are moving, but I'm not moving. And there's screams, all this stuff. So I'm waking up. I'm terrified. I'm not wanting to go back to sleep because why do I want to deal with that? After I came forward, there were, people that wanted to say thank you, and I get that. And again, some of the best advice I had gotten was from James Smith or Jeff Smith with PD and Phoenix PD, and James Smith. And he said, people are going to be curious and they're going to want to thank you, and it's going to completely mess you up, but you have to have that grace and just, kind of roll with it. So that's what I did. And people coming up and wanting to shake my hand and hug me and all this stuff. And it's just like, part of me is like, hey, we're strangers, what the heck's going on, and I just want to scream inside, but, I got to be nice and accommodating. Not that I would be mean, but
yeah, that's just an awkward thing.
And so every time that happens and, people are either crying or they're getting emotional, it's causing me to get emotional. It's picking that scab that just barely started to heal right off. And no one prepares you for that. The first time I had a widow come up to me and cry and hug me and literally tell me, I wish somebody were there for my husband like you were there for that trooper. Nothing to say to that. That's it. I'm done. All I can do is say, I'm so sorry, and cry along with them. Okay. When you have grown men, officers who have been doing it for 10, 15, 20 years, maybe longer, maybe they were vets beforehand, coming up and crying and going, oh my God, my partner was, end of watch, line of duty death. Thank you so much. I've got a badge from a DC Metro officer who gave that to me because he had been in a similar situation and his partner didn't make it. These are things that there is no playbook. There is no preparation that you could possibly have for this until that moment arises. And for us to ignore it is disingenuous, and quite frankly, it's unhealthy, because I think I went through and what others have gone through, whether they're law enforcement, military, first responders, and they don't have that ability or that avenue to speak to somebody about the hurt that they're feeling inside. And it tears them up. I was fortunate. I didn't turn to alcohol. I didn't turn to drugs. And I'm not saying that it's good, but I could see how somebody would, I wonder what happened had James not had, that conversation with me. And had I not taken it to heart and found a really good trauma therapist who I've referred to. I've had people reach out to me over the years and I refer them to my therapist because she was amazing, and quite frankly, she changed my life, and that's great. But you have to get, not just adequate help. It has to be an experienced, licensed therapist who's dedicated their life to trauma therapy, or else it's not going to work. No offense to other therapists, but the first therapist I saw was provided by DPS, and no offense to DPS, she was a friggin' family therapist. She had no business dealing with friggin' the type of trauma that I was dealing with, none whatsoever. So after 2 visits, I'm like, I'm out. I'll call you if I need you, because she was making it worse. And then seeing a qualified therapist was definitely like, yep, this is the way it needs to be. This is why every year when I cover Police Week, I make sure that one of those episodes that I do is dedicated to mental health and mental health awareness for law enforcement, first responders, and veterans. This is something they carry around with them every day. This is why we have the suicide rates that we do with, those 3 areas. And it's 2023 now. We can't ignore that. Last episode that we did, I got choked up and emotional. It took me days to reset myself after that, bringing everything up. And I've got the tools in my toolbox to do it. I couldn't imagine an individual, man or woman, getting triggered to the point to where now they have nobody to talk to. They don't even have any adequate tools in their toolbox because they haven't received any type of, good care.
Mhm.
What they go through, and keeping that quiet. And where some people say that, well, it's a macho thing, and this is why we don't talk. Yes, I agree. But for women that are in those positions, they don't want to be looked at as inferior, because if they show emotion, then see, you're a woman and you're not cut out for this line of work. So it's a double-edged sword. I don't like it when
Mhm.
people make it out like it's just the guys have it rougher. I beg to differ. Women have it just as bad in that department because they have just as
Mhm.
much to lose. You know, if they were to speak out saying, hey, I'm going through this, it's affecting me.
Mhm.
PTSD is equal opportunity. I don't care who you are, what your background is, or anything like that. When it hits you, it hits you. And it just, I don't know. It's something that I'm very personal about because of my experience, but it's something that shouldn't be ignored anymore. As a gun owner, and to instructors and everybody in the gun owning community,
Mhm.
it's a part of training that needs to be talked about on a regular
Totally
basis.
agree. Yeah.
Understand that there is no playbook. And
Yeah.
Lord forbid, I would never want anybody, any of your listeners or anybody I know, strangers, to go through what I've been through. But if that were to ever happen, forget about calling the lawyer, dude. That stuff will work itself out. Find a qualified trauma therapist and start working it out. Because it'll haunt you. Even with
Mhm.
therapy, it's haunt you. Things will never be the same.
Yeah, that couldn't be a truer statement. The emotional side of things you definitely covered and went through. I'm curious to know if you would dive into the spiritual aspect. How has your faith changed, or has it? And
Um,
how can your faith help you? Because you were talking about in the beginning how you were feeling guilty about certain things. And depending on your spirituality, how you view that, might affect how you process things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, part of it was I watched Little Mermaid, the original, because that always got me.
There's that humor coming out again.
Mhm. One of the best movies of '89, I believe. So part of that presentation that I used to give, I haven't given it in a while. I haven't been asked to give it in a while, and that's okay. Um, I let people know right out of the gate, this is very much my testimony as well. And so for me to talk about the spirituality, I have to touch on that just a little bit. Rough childhood, had faith, lost it, came back to it. I credit my best friend, Chris Harrell, with that, because 3 days after we meet, he's like, hey, do you want to go to church with me and my wife? And I'm like, I'll take a hard pass, but we could hang out. And through the entirety of our friendship, up until the point where I finally decided to go to church with them, I kept saying no, but he never gave up on me. And so Sunday before the shooting, so we'll say 5 days before the shooting, I'm in church and I'm, following along, and I'm off in a side area, not with the bigger group. And I'm taking my notes and for the service, but the Pastor Nate, would always put these just, scriptures down at the end. Sometimes it dealt with the service, sometimes it didn't. This one was Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong, be courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, because the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And I get goosebumps saying it. I'm starting to get choked up because, like a bolt of blue, it hit my heart. And I started crying. And Chris looks at me and he's like, are you okay? And I'm like, oh my God, this is like the first time. And I can't remember that I felt the love of Christ on my heart. I had walked around with so much guilt and so many stones in my pocket that I was just afraid to put down because I felt I wasn't worthy. Hell, it took everything just to go back to church because I felt I wasn't worthy to be in the house of the Lord anymore. At that point, I'm just kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I guess I'll give it a try, because at this point I'm screwed. I'm not going to get into heaven. So, but here I am. After that, it was just like, boom. And I couldn't believe how powerful it was. And, we leave church and I come home and I'm thinking about that. And it was just, wow. Okay. So now 4 days later at 0400 at mile marker 89 in the middle of freaking nowhere, this is happening,
Mm.
Too many things had to happen precisely how they needed to happen for me to be there. And when it clicked, I had already been shuffled from a DPS vehicle to a first responder vehicle. And a woman, I believe she was with Buckeye Fire, said, "Oh, you're a hero." And that was the first time that word had been used. And I said, "Nope, I'm not a hero." I said, "This was God's work." I said, "The Lord got involved here." And I meant that, because it was that was galvanizing to my faith. Everything that I'd gone through as a young boy, a young man, all those trials, everything, every decision that I had made, whether correctly or incorrectly for that matter, they weren't all good choices, led me to that moment. I was being steered and guided to that moment. And had I not had gone through everything that I had gone through, which caused me to train as hard as I did, and be hardened as far as like, I am the defender, I am the protector, I am going to get involved regardless of what might happen to me, everybody else is going home safe. That mentality, I was able to do what I was able to do. Heck, after the press conference, people who know me really well and had my number, my phone's getting blown up. "Dude, why didn't we figure it out? It was you." "Oh, it totally makes sense now. There's nobody else who could have done that but you." Like, these were literally everything that what people were saying who knew me. And so, yes, but at every time when someone says that, I'm like, nope, that was Jesus getting involved. That was all him. He just chose me. Why he chose me, I have no idea. I tell that to people all the time. Who am I? I use a camera for a living. I got tattoos and a shaved head, for the Lord's sakes. Why he chose me, it's still a mystery, but he did. And so we get to Anaheim, and we were going to Disneyland. For those who didn't watch the first episode, I make a phone call. I go down to the bar. Heidi and I said we're going to give each other a moment. So she's showering. I'm down at the bar because I felt I earned my drink. And I don't drink, but I felt I earned at least one. And I reached out to my pastor and I said, "Hey, I need to tell you something, and you can't tell anybody, but this is what happened. And I'm having some conflict right now because of what I did. And even though I know it was right and it was justified, I still had to take somebody's life." And that's what people don't realize. When people come up and say, "I can't wait to be challenged." Yeah, wrong. Get rid of your gun, please. You are wrong for the job. I did not start that day out thinking I was going to take somebody's life. And I would never want to do it again. Good or bad, justified or not. That's not what I want to do. It's not who I am, but it's what I had to do at the moment. And people don't get that, that conflict. Now, I've made peace with it because of my faith, but for someone who doesn't have faith, I can see why that would cause an inner turmoil or more of an issue. Because it wasn't cool. It wasn't fun. There was no high five afterwards, drinking at the bar with everybody, nothing. It was me in a crowded room talking to my pastor, trying to make sense of just what the heck happened 5 hours ago. More than that, by the time we got to Anaheim, are you kidding me? And so that's what people need to understand. There should never be a time where you are celebrating taking a life, regardless of the justification. It's not right. And it just happened that what had to be done to save a life. And I don't know any other way I could say that and try to make people understand. It still hurts. It still hurts. I still sometimes see blood on my hands. Okay. That doesn't go away. It doesn't wash off. Your soul is stained. That's it. Bottom line. And when I do pass away, if I'm fortunate enough to be, "Hey, St. Peter, what's going on?" Yeah, there's a mulligan in the book. I get it, but I kind of had to do it. Can I still come in? That's going to be me, is just trying to justify myself again, what I did, to get in. And so, yeah, and maybe people are different. Maybe not everybody has that same experience or has that same inner turmoil, but I do. And I think a portion of people do. And if they don't understand that that is completely natural and they think they're the odd person out, which I did for many months until I talked to James, then that's wrong. They need to have somebody they can talk to and talk to freely without judgment. And that first conversation was with the pastor, And so I am grateful. I am grateful every day for Chris and his friendship and love that we have for one another. Because again, had Jesus not brought him into my life, I never would have had an open heart that morning. Okay. One scripture out of an entire book of scripture and verses to make me feel that was the last thing I needed. I had everything already given to me except an open heart and able to let that guilt go. And that morning it happened. And he said, okay, now you're ready. Now I'm going to use you, you know? And so when I tell people that morning, as much as it hurts and to talk about it sometimes and bringing everything up, what a blessing that was. People get it. Some people get it. Some people don't, but it was. Because who has an opportunity to say that, yes, I got involved and I made a difference in the life, not just a really good man and Ed Anderson, but his wife and his daughters and his grandchildren. That is amazing. And that is something, that is the light in all that darkness that I'll always be grateful
you have to focus on. Yeah, you got to focus on that too, Thomas. And you're still bringing light. You're still doing good work. It's not just that moment in time that has led you down a path of advocating for others, for helping others to understand more about, this kind of situation, which again, I don't think is talked about enough because it's hard to talk about. It's uncomfortable to talk about. It's not warm, fuzzy stuff. And that's important sometimes, I think. If we're going to get out there and we're going to train defensively, like, honestly, how many people do you really think that are shooting at paper targets at a gun range are really thinking in their minds that could really be a human being? Even just that little part alone, right?
I would say maybe 10 to 20%. And in my mind, I think I'm being generous in that assumption. And it was one of the reasons. So I always tell people, and I said this last show, we don't train to win. We train to improve our odds of a positive outcome. A positive outcome meaning nobody loses their life. Just end of story. I don't care. People can argue with me with that if they want to, and that's fine. Because there is no guarantee of a quote unquote win. None.
Good point. That's a good point.
There's too many things that can happen legitimately. Gun jams, misfire, suspect comes out from nowhere that you didn't actually see type thing. And this is why I am very much an advocate for training in multiple disciplines. Indoor range, sure, but shooting at a paper target at 20 yards in a climate controlled condition only gets you so far. Don't put on your battle rattle, okay? Go out in what you normally wear and practice behind cover. This could happen. I didn't have cover. I was bare naked out in the open. Low light, no light, sure. 0400 in January in the middle of the open desert. I got starlights and his friggin' blue and reds. That's it. There wasn't a good light at all. And I didn't even have a light on my gun at the time. I hadn't modified it yet. So I mean, it was one of those things. You practice moving and all these different things again. But in my mind, when I'm training, it's always with the thing of controlling a theater. And I referred to it. Once I got out of my truck, I'm on a 360-degree stage, a theater that I must control. And as I'm advancing towards Ed, towards that situation, the stage is narrowing. I'm literally getting tunnel vision as I'm checking off all these potential, threats to myself until there's nothing left than the suspect in front of me. And that's because when I trained, I'm looking at it that way. I am on a theater and I now need to narrow it down by what I'm doing and how I'm doing it to get to that end result. Had the suspect threw his hands up in the air, laid on the ground and gave up, I would have gladly held him at gunpoint and tried to cuff him. Probably not tried to cuff him, but at gunpoint, I don't want to get close and, cause a different situation. And now I'm kind of hindsighting it, but I wouldn't have shot him. Everybody's like, oh, why didn't you shoot him in the leg? I don't know, because he wouldn't stop beating the officer to death. And my direct commands were met with a shut up. This is why I shot him. He wasn't going to stop. Had he stopped though, then that was it. There would have been a trial and everything. I'm not a vigilante. Nobody should do that. As much as sometimes we cheer it and we applaud it because sometimes the wheels of justice move very slow. That's still not right. And I couldn't live with myself for that, as far as that goes.
Mhm.
But it needs to be talked about. And here's the funny thing. Go to a shooting range. What does everybody have typically on the back of their belt? It's trauma kit. It's a personal trauma kit. Why? What does every instructor say? Well, if you're going to learn to make a hole, you should learn to plug that hole. Really? You're going to talk about that, but you're not going to talk about the aftermath one of these students can possibly go through if they need to kill somebody in self-defense,
Mhm.
because that's what it
Mhm.
is. We're more concerned about stopping the bleed than we are about receiving appropriate, not just appropriate, but exceptional mental health after the fact to help us with our trauma. That just
Mhm.
goes to show you where that mindset is, where nobody really thinks about it. I'm more worried about the hole in my heart than I am anything else,
Mm.
because if I can't fix this, then everything else is moot,
Well, and
you know.
everybody else in your life is affected as well. It's a ripple effect, right? If that yeah,
Yeah.
that's just the
So
way it is.
it is. And so for people who haven't experienced PTSD, like I had to apologize to a lot of people when I started going forward and digging in and everything. I had to go back and apologize to a lot of people and thank a lot of people for sticking with me, because no one suffers alone with PTSD. You don't. You have, in some cases, not my case, but in some cases, you have a wife or a husband that has to sit up those nights with you and help you when you're, or at the grocery store when that's when it sneaks up on you and you have your breakdown, or, going down the worst scenario where now you're using alcohol or drugs
Mhm.
to numb yourself out because it hurts so badly. You just don't want to feel anything. And these are things that affect everybody. Again, not excusing it, but this is why we see domestic violence rates being as high, and sometimes infidelity, because bad decision making. We're on the edge, and this is just kind of the byproduct of what happens there. So all these different things that people don't think about, but it affects everybody in your circle. And
Mhm.
again, the thing when I do Police Week, one of those broadcasts that I do, I tell people, make sure we're remembering the families, because that's the emotional backbone. Okay. And not enough is talked about how that PTSD affects the family as well. Because there's so much that occurs when you're going through it: hurt, anger, sadness, despair, rage in some cases, and it boils over. And unfortunately, it touches everybody that we care about.
Yeah.
And it just, again, because we're afraid to talk about it, 2023, we're flying helicopters across Mars, Laura, but I can't get, upper command for a major, municipality law enforcement division to pony up money for exceptional mental health services for their officers. Are you effing kidding me? That's just, it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
And if we want to see, and you see, here's the thing when we look at it in that regard. And I mean, and everybody, I've done my thing where people have reached out after the fact, and it wasn't a dynamic critical incident, use of lethal force. They had other trauma. I mean, we could talk about rape victims, child abuse, anything like that that causes that severe of a trauma needs to be dealt with. And we need to be willing to help these individuals without judgment.
Yeah.
But if we want to see our men and women who wear the badge or respond, first responders, or are vets, active or retired, we need to understand that it should be offered. I don't want to say mandatory. It should be done in a way that has dignity, because no one wants to admit. Again, we're afraid. We're afraid to be courageous and say, I have a problem, but let them know that's okay. And support groups that aren't run by someone. Like, the best therapists have always been through it. The best, addiction counselors were addicts themselves. Trauma
Mhm.
therapists, they had trauma themselves, because now we can speak from a place of firsthand experience, not somebody who their experience is 8 years of college and a bunch of clinicals. So you don't know anything about trauma. You think you know because you've talked to all these people who have trauma, but you know nothing about what it actually does.
Mhm.
And I think when we talk about better policing, one of the things that goes into that training, you hear, and again, I'm not trying to be political or polarizing, people talk about defund the police, or they need better training because we want them to be crisis management counselors and psychologists, and they wear all these different hats and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Not one of those individuals, whether they're an elected official or part of an activist group or anything, not one of them says, hey, maybe we should offer them some quality mental health services, because the job they do is one of the toughest career paths you can choose, because you don't get paid anything. People don't appreciate what you do or what you stand for until they need you, But sure, let's make sure they understand and can try to diagnose someone who's suffering from a schizoid episode, bipolar disorder, or whatever the case may be, within 90 seconds of interaction. And now they're being, someone's running at them with a knife or a gun. Again, let's not worry about, let's worry about the suspect or perpetrator, in that regard. So I think it's ridiculous. You can't have one without the other. And if we're going to talk about this, we just really need to, lack of a better term, get naked and let it all hang out and talk about it. As crass as that may sound, everybody wants to tiptoe around it, and that time has to stop. It really does. If we're going to continue to move forward and evolve, we need to be able to have these tough discussions. And
I appreciate that you're willing to do that.
Yeah, and it's the only way we're gonna have resolution, a meaningful resolution, because the time of putting Band-Aids on a laceration that needs sutures is over with. And we just need to realize that, and not all scars are visible. Some of my worst scars you can't see, and the only way I was able to heal, because I was able to get help, and I had a great support system around me, and so that's why.
And I think your faith too helped a lot.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Again, it all had to be the way it happened for it to actually happen. I believe that,
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I get a good reminder from the Lord, hey, it's going to be okay. I still might call on you, but it's going to be okay. It's just like, all right, what are you going to do? Again, like, who am I? Shaved head and a tattoo. So,
well, we're glad that you answered the call. We're getting towards the end of the broadcast. We've got about 7 minutes left. So if you guys have questions for Thomas that I haven't gone over yet, please put those in the comment section, and we'll be getting to those later. I'm kind of diverting here just a little bit, because I had a class recently and I have an opinion about something, and I want your take on it, because you've actually been in a defensive gun use encounter. So I'm like, well, he'd be the perfect person to ask this question.
Right.
So I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I am curious, because I have tried this and I believe I have formed a conclusion based on my experimentation. But in gun training, and this is a total gun training question, in gun training, 90% of gun trainers teach front sight focus.
Right.
And we know that we're biologically hardwired to focus on, when we have that adrenaline dump, to focus on whatever's trying to kill us. We know that to be a fact.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make logical sense to me in my brain why we would teach front sight focus. Like, okay, I get you need to know what a sight picture is correctly, but why would you drill front sight focus into people for defensive gun use if they are biologically hardwired to focus on what's trying to kill them?
Right.
And can't you get a good enough sight picture if you've done enough training to be able to get a decent shot? Or am I thinking wrong here? I'm just curious your opinion.
So yeah, and this is strictly my opinion based on my training. So I've trained rear sight, front sight, and gross sight picture. And depending on what distance I'm at, proximity is what I would fall back on. And I've even trained so much. So my gross sight picture, because I use a Glock, is the square. And the square goes over whatever I want to hit, because the barrel is directly in front of the square. In theory, that's the way it works. And, my shooting, I used gross sight picture. I had a lot of instructors like, oh, did you focus on that front sight? No, it was gross sight picture. I was within the 20-yard limit, and I pushed out, boom, boom, boom. Business was done, and I was actually 20, not 20 yards. So I believe your opinion and is correct from my point of view in my line of training. Now, if I need to take a shot that's 40 yards, of course, I would have to question, why am I shooting at something that's 40 yards away? I'm going to concentrate more on my sights as I push out, not the sight, that square on the back. But I've also done low light training where when I burp my light, I know that if my light is down here, my barrel is just over it, roughly 1.25 inches. And so if I shoot just above where that light is showing, then I'm going to hit where I want to hit, or close enough to make a difference. And at the time of my shooting, I was still doing modified Weaver, which it was funny because afterwards everybody's like, dude, why are you still shooting Weaver? Like talking trash. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm pretty sure I'm 1-0 in my gunfights. Enough. I'm not a jerk or arrogant or anything like that, but it's like, whatever's getting the job done, I don't care if it's a shot in a rock. That's what I'm going to do,
Yeah, it's a good point.
And so as far as that goes, now, again, for me, I can only speak for myself and my experience training and my use of lethal force. I did use gross sight picture because I was close enough and I trained so often that was my default. Within that time, it's draw and boom. But I was also in the close ready. There was a lot of misinformation in the newspaper. I didn't go back to my truck to get my pistol. I exited with my pistol in close ready. So I'm already like this as I'm approaching, and I'm looking for that clear shot. Again, I don't want Ed to be in the line of fire. So I have to work my way around, and I'm starting at the 9 o'clock position. I'm going 10, 11, 12. And by the time I get to where I'm now there, I'm giving direct commands. I'm in the 1 o'clock position roughly, because now I have complete, he's not in the way. Boom, I can go to work without really worrying about inadvertently hitting him, because that's a very real. I've got a suspect on top of somebody, and I am now going to fire my pistol. If that doesn't make your butthole pucker, I don't know what will. Because again, someone who's not trained enough, they can take the first shot and really jerk that trigger, and now the gun points down, or that second shot or whatever. So just a lot of those things. But at that point, when you go shut up, I'm already ready and I'm pushing out. And the only thing I'm concentrating on is that gross sight picture. Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah. But do you even think that you would have had, do you even think if you, I guess, I don't know. Do you think in that moment you could have, if you would have hyper focused your attention, could you have really seen the front sight of that gun? Really? Like if that was required?
I don't know, because here's what I like. Again, and taking all the classes, which again was a blessing, being invited to take these classes, and I would love to attend even more on the science, what we go through from biomechanics and the time dilation, the audio exclusion, everything. I went through all of that. And so now, as I have that tunnel vision, all I can see is a suspect, and I cannot hear anything. And so as I push out, I see that, and I see the shell, ka-chink, ka-chink, muzzle flash, ka-chink, and that's what I'm actually seeing,
Wow, that's crazy.
that gross sight picture, but I'm actually seeing that. And I was actually told by someone who works for the federal government that, yep, some people see that. Some people see their front sight. It's different for everybody, but there is something that your hyper focus is on. But the minute that last shot was fired and I knew the threat was over, okay, I got full field of view, and I'm talking instantaneously, full field of view.
Really?
My hearing came right away, because now I can hear the of the wind and everything like that. And I can hear, unfortunately, the suspect, as that blood's pumping out and everything. I would never want to hear a death rattle again as long as I lived. It was one of the most horrific sounds. And anything that even comes close to that just freaks me out, again, one of those triggers. It's just, it is what it is. And that'll be
so everything slowed down. And then after the threat was over, then everything just snapped right back. That's crazy.
Right. And it's funny because nothing is really slowing down. It's just that
Right.
time dilation it sees. It
Right.
seems that way. So
Isn't it your brain having to process?
there's a couple different theories on that.
Oh, okay.
Why that happens. It's interesting. It's also kind of like the prevailing theory now that our eyes constantly saccade. And that's
Mhm.
because we see in such high definition, we can't take everything in at once. So we
Mm.
concentrate on different spots. And when we have to focus, we focus. And everything else is essentially, non-high definition, which is
Hmm.
true. If you have time to think
Mhm.
about it, that's how it works because we can't process everything we intake visually all at once. Um,
Mhm.
uh, According to the detectives and some of the forensics, it was roughly 7 to 10 seconds from the time I exit vehicle to the time I take last shot. To me, that seems a little too fast. I thought it was slower, but it's probably that time dilation. But let's say it was 10 seconds for the sake of conversation. 10 seconds is 10 seconds. It doesn't slow down or speed up. It's our
Right.
perception of that 10
Right.
seconds expands or contracts.
Mhm.
But I do find it very odd because even before I had taken any of those classes, I clearly remember, and I'm giving these details to the detectives because this is how I remember it happening. And yes, I didn't hear any of the shots, because I had that auditory exclusion and everything. And one of the parts is your body, your mind is, okay, you need everything on this movement and you need everything here. Ears don't matter in this situation. So we're going to turn everything
Okay.
you don't need.
Mhm.
But yeah, as soon as it was done and over with, everything came back. And yeah, it was very Twilight Zone-ish because it was at that
Mhm.
point that I dropped to one knee. And before I even say anything to Ed, I'm distracted, like I said, with the blood pumping and everything. And then it's like, okay, back on the clock. And then
Yeah.
it's, hey, my name's Thomas. The suspect's dead. You don't have to worry about him anymore. And I'm assessing, where are you injured? Get the first
Mhm.
aid kit and let's start moving along now that role of first responder.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, and that's just, again,
That's crazy.
training has to do with that. And then, you get those mental barriers that are really now starting to segment everything for your own protection. Everything that I experienced that morning, that afternoon, and the immediate days after, that was my mind protecting me from myself. You
Mhm.
can't deal with this whole thing. So we're going to partition it and we're going to let
Mhm.
you deal with little bits at a time. And if it seems like
Mhm.
you're starting to crack, we're going to throw another quick partition up. Almost like in a ship, they've got the waterproof compartments to kind of seal off and preserve the rest of the ship. That's
Mhm.
very much looking back how it felt. Um,
That makes
you know,
sense.
and yeah,
Hmm.
that's a self-defense mechanism,
Yeah.
but that's not foolproof. And you can only absorb so much emotional and mental trauma before the partitions make no difference and they all come crumbling down.
Yeah.
So
Gosh, that's a lot of information, Thomas. Thank you so much for all of that tonight.
again, I really appreciate it. I wish Adam would have been able to be with us.
Yeah, Adam tried, guys. He just could not get the internet to cooperate where he's at, and he tried a different computer, and that didn't help. And so he really wanted to be on tonight, but he wasn't able to. So we apologize for that. But I think we covered some good ground, Thomas.
Yeah,
Even though he wasn't with us. Are there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience before we turn in? We're over the hour now, so.
we are. And I apologize for that. Sometimes I
No,
can
it's
be
okay.
bit verbose. I would say that if no matter what you're going through right now, and again, I don't want to limit this to a use of lethal force. PTSD, it is what it is. For those who may have suffered abuse, domestic, sexual abuse, as a child, as an adult, anything like that, don't be afraid to reach out. Okay. There's hotlines you can contact, talk to someone close to you. Even if you're not of faith, go talk to a pastor. They're going to listen. They want to help. That's why they do what they do. um, and take that first step. The scariest thing I ever did, one of them, was taking that first step and saying, yes, I have a problem. That's PTSD. I'm suffering just like an addict would do, and
Mhm.
this is what I need to do, the road to recovery. And It's hard and you got to dig in, but the liberation you'll feel once you get past, and you'll wake up one morning and you realize, oh, I'm on the right path. And you start to feel whole again, and you're bringing, balance to your life, emotionally and mentally. And it's amazing. And for whatever reason, if you're afraid to reach out, to someone, I'm on Facebook. Everybody can find me. I'm really easy to find. You can always message me. I don't have to respond. I'm not here to solve your problems, but if at least starts a catalyst for you to go, hey, okay, I was able to talk, then definitely, then do it, but just take that first step. I urge you. And for anybody who's considering carrying a firearm as a use of self-defense, whether that's on their person every day or having one in the home, think about it. Look in your heart of hearts, look in that mirror. You can't just say it, I'll be the one. You have to believe it to your core. And if you can't believe it to your core, you might want to think about another course of action. Because I've seen enough videos with John Correa where people, they froze, and they ended up losing their life. It's not a game. It's the real deal. There's no re-ups, there's no respawns, there's no extra lives, there's nothing like that. It's the real deal. So I would urge you to really think about that and understand there is no shame if that's not who you are. Maybe you're a healer, a teacher, an educator. Maybe you're going to be the person who helps somebody take that first step on their journey to healing. There's all of us have a purpose and a role to serve. Just because yours isn't that, don't worry. There's another one out there for you. You're going to be marvelous at.
You're so encouraging, Thomas. Really, really good. I really appreciate your time tonight.
Well, I appreciate you having me back on. I hope everybody that was listening or watching, either live or in the replay, got something out of this. And I appreciate your time, taking the time to listen and tuning in with Laura. I know she's got a lot of great guests and a lot of people talk about a lot of great stuff. So I definitely appreciate you supporting her. That's awesome.
Oh, come on now. You're getting me right here in the feelers, Thomas.
I'm just
You're
saying,
so sweet. Thank you.
Saying, because and here's the thing, you offer a forum, a town hall, if you will, for people to have these honest conversations. And that's important. That's so important, because without that venue, these conversations can't take place. And by these conversations taking place, it gives people to say, hey, I was watching Defenders Live the other day with Laura, and she had so-and-so on, and they brought up a really interesting point. This is how conversation starts amongst educated and level-headed people. And through dialogue, we can find a common ground and may not agree, but build that bridge of communication. And I think that's tantamount.
Well, I don't mind being the facilitator. I don't always have the wisdom or the knowledge, but I certainly work to find people that do. And so I consider you somebody that is very brave, not just for your action, but for your advocacy to help other people, that you continue. That's just where your heart is. I can just tell. It just oozes out of you. And I'm so glad that you were able to find the light again, Thomas.
Me too. And I appreciate that, Laura, very much.
All right. Well, it won't be the last time I see you, but thank you so much for tonight.
No, thank you again. And goodbye to everybody. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless.
All right, guys. So we're over the hour, but it was worth it, right? It was worth it. And feel free to email me or message me if you have any questions about that too. And I've been able to network with a lot of people, a lot of guests that I've had on the show, and people have had questions for me, and I've been able to get them to the right people to help them. And that's a really cool feeling as well. So feel free to reach out to me for anything. Next week, we're going to have Gary Quesenberry on. He is an Army veteran, retired federal air marshal, business owner, author, and was on season 3 of Top Shot. So he has a lot going on. He has quite a diverse background. He's also been featured as a situational awareness expert on the syndicated TV series I Crime with Elizabeth Vargas. So He has an extensive background in domestic and foreign counterterror training and has worked in both the private and corporate sectors to educate others on the importance of situational awareness and personal safety. So he's going to be on next Wednesday at 7 p.m. I hope that you'll tune in again next week. We'll see you then. Until then, take care.